The Galactic Assembly Hall stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian stone, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into artificial clouds that shimmered with bioluminescent organisms from 100 different worlds. And Ambassador Chen Mei stood at the center of it all, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her 42 years of life, surrounded by beings who measured their civilizations in millennia, while humanity still counted in centuries, their eyes fixed upon her with expressions ranging from pity to outright disdain. And she knew that the next few minutes would determine whether Earth would be granted a seat among the stars, or cast back into the darkness of isolation, forgotten and alone. The Valdrine High Chancellor, a being of crystalline form whose body refracted light into dancing rainbows across the chamber floor, spoke first with a voice that resonated like wind chimes in a storm, each word carrying the weight of 3,000 years of unbroken civilization. And his message was clear even before the translation matrices converted his harmonic speech into something Chen could understand. Humanity was not ready. Humanity was too weak. Humanity was too young to comprehend the responsibilities that came with joining the greater galactic community. And perhaps in another 1,000 years, perhaps when humans had learned to control their violent impulses and their primitive need for conflict, perhaps then the Assembly might reconsider their application. But not today. Not now. Not while Earth remained so fragile and so foolishly unprepared. Chen felt her jaw tighten, but maintained the diplomatic smile she had practiced 10,000 times in the mirror of her shuttle, knowing that any sign of the anger building in her chest would only confirm their prejudices, would only prove to these ancient beings that humans were indeed too emotional, too unstable, too primitive to walk among them as equals, and she glanced briefly at the holographic display floating before her, seeing Earth rendered in blue and white perfection, so small compared to the massive stations and ring worlds these civilizations called home, so vulnerable compared to the shielded fortress planets that had weathered stellar storms and cosmic catastrophes for epochs beyond human comprehension. The Korthax delegation, towering insectoid beings whose chitinous armor gleamed like polished bronze under the chamber's lighting, clicked their mandibles in what Chen's briefing files had identified as their equivalent of dismissive laughter. And their speaker, a warrior scholar named Thexkal, rose to his full 3-meter height, his forearms spreading wide as he addressed the assembly with words that cut deeper than any blade, pointing out that humanity had barely escaped their own gravity well, that human ships still relied on chemical propulsion for atmospheric launches, that human colonies numbered fewer than a dozen scattered outposts across their own solar system. And how could such a species possibly contribute anything meaningful to an alliance that spanned 12 galaxies and commanded the power to reshape reality itself? Chen waited, as protocol demanded, for each species to voice their concerns, watching as the Cerellian hive mind collective pulsed with colors indicating skepticism, as the Draconid Empire's representative folded his massive wings in a gesture of finality, as even the normally neutral Luminary Confederacy remained silent when given the opportunity to speak in humanity's defense. And she realized with growing certainty that this was not merely a rejection. This was a demonstration, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to remind Earth of its place in the cosmic hierarchy, to ensure that humans understood the vast gulf that separated them from true civilization, to make absolutely certain that humanity would not dare to reach beyond its station again. But Chen had not traveled 300 light years, had not spent 18 months in cryosleep, had not left behind her daughter's 7th birthday and her son's graduation ceremony just to witness humanity's humiliation, and as the Valdrine Chancellor prepared to call for the formal vote that would seal Earth's fate, she activated her personal communicator with a subtle gesture that none of the alien delegates noticed, sending a single prearranged signal across the quantum-entangled network that connected her to the fleet waiting in high orbit above the assembly world, a signal that meant only one thing. It was time to show them what humanity had really been doing for the past 50 years. The chamber's massive viewports, which had been displaying the serene beauty of the assembly world's twin moons, suddenly flickered and shifted, their transparency adjusting to reveal the starfield beyond. And there in the darkness of space something was changing. Something massive was emerging from the shadow of the nearest moon, its presence distorting the light around it like a gravitational lens, growing larger with each passing second as it moved into clear view, and the delegates who had been so confident in their dismissal of humanity began to rise from their seats, their various forms of shock and confusion creating a symphony of surprised sounds that echoed through the vast chamber. Chen allowed herself a small smile now, no longer the humble petitioner, but the bearer of humanity's greatest secret, and she spoke into the stunned silence with a voice that carried across every translation matrix in the assembly hall, asking them a simple question that she had waited her entire career to deliver: whether they would like to reconsider their assessment of human engineering capabilities, because the structure now dominating their sky was not a ship, not a station, not anything they had seen before in all their thousands of years of spacefaring civilization. It was something entirely new, something impossible, something that would change everything they thought they knew about what humanity could achieve. The thing that hung in orbit above the assembly world defied every principle of megastructure engineering that the gathered civilizations had developed over their millennia of space colonization, its outer shell alone measuring 800 kilometers in diameter, a perfect sphere of interlocking hexagonal panels that gleamed like mother of pearl under the system's binary suns. Each panel etched with solar collectors so efficient, they made the Valdrine's legendary stellar harvesters look like primitive windmills, and the assembled delegates could only stare in disbelief as their sensors struggled to comprehend the readings, flooding their systems, detecting power signatures that rivaled small stars, life support systems capable of sustaining billions of inhabitants, and gravitational generators that somehow created Earth-normal gravity across every level of the massive structure, without the conventional rotating sections that every other species required. Ambassador. Chen watched the viewports as the orbital megacity, humanity's secret project codenamed New Harmony, rotated slowly to reveal its full magnificence, and she could see the shock rippling through the assembly like a physical wave. The Valdrine Chancellor's crystalline form, flickering with colors that indicated profound confusion. The Korthax warrior scholar Thexcal's mandibles frozen mid-click. The Cerelian hive mind's bioluminescent patterns stuttering in uncoordinated chaos. Because what they were seeing should not exist, could not exist according to every model and theory their civilizations had developed, and yet there it was, hanging in their sky like a second moon, undeniable and magnificent and utterly human in its audacious ambition. The Draconid Empire's representative, Lord Cathazar, was the first to recover his composure, his massive scaled form turning toward Chen with eyes that burned like molten gold, demanding to know how humanity had constructed such a thing, how they had solved the energy requirements that had stymied every attempt at building spherical habitats, larger than a few kilometers, how they had overcome the structural stress problems that made conventional megastructures collapse under their own mass at scales beyond a certain threshold, and his voice carried an edge that Chen recognized as fear, not of humanity itself but of the implications, of what it meant that the species they had dismissed as primitive, children had somehow leapfrogged past. Technologies that had taken other civilizations tens of thousands of years to develop. Chen activated the holographic projector built into her diplomatic podium, and the air above the assembly floor shimmered into a three-dimensional cutaway diagram of New Harmony, revealing layers upon layers of habitation rings, agricultural zones spanning thousands of hectares, manufacturing districts that could produce everything from medical supplies to starship components, universities and research centers dedicated to every field of science humanity had ever explored, all of it interconnected by transit systems that moved people and materials at speeds the delegates' sensors confirmed were faster than anything their own cities achieved. And Chen explained in calm, measured tones that humanity had not solved these problems through brute force or advanced materials alone, but through something her species had always excelled at: creative collaboration and the willingness to think differently. The secret, she revealed, lay in humanity's approach to the fundamental problem. While every other civilization had tried to build megastructures using conventional materials and engineering, accepting the limitations and working within them, human engineers had instead asked a different question. What if the structure itself was alive? What if instead of building a city in space they could grow one? And that simple shift in perspective had led to a breakthrough that combined biotechnology with quantum-stabilized carbon frameworks, creating a hybrid construction that was part machine, part organism capable of self-repair, continuous growth, and adaptation to stresses that would tear apart any conventional structure. The panels that made up New Harmony's outer shell, Chen continued, were actually living tissue, genetically engineered organisms descended from Earth's extremophile bacteria, modified to thrive in the vacuum of space and to process raw solar radiation into usable energy with 98% efficiency. each panel connected to its neighbors through a neural network that gave the entire structure a form of distributed intelligence, not conscious in any way that would concern the assembly's ethics committees, but aware enough to detect damage, reroute resources, and maintain itself indefinitely without the massive maintenance crews that conventional space stations required. And this biological component worked in symbiosis with the quantum-stabilized carbon frameworks that provided structural integrity, the two systems supporting each other in ways that made the whole stronger than any sum of parts could achieve. The Luminary Confederacy's speaker, a being of pure coherent light contained within a humanoid-shaped force field, asked the question that Chen had been waiting for. How long had humanity been working on this project? How many resources had Earth devoted to constructing New Harmony? And more importantly, why had humanity kept it secret until this moment? And Chen's answer sent another wave of shock through the chamber. Because humanity had not built just one megacity, they had built 7, each one positioned at strategic points throughout human-claimed space, each one capable of supporting 2 billion inhabitants in comfort, each one a testament to what her species could accomplish when they worked together toward a common goal. And the construction had taken only 47 years from initial concept to full deployment, a timeline that made the Valdrene's 3-century construction of their largest space station seem glacially slow. But Chen wasn't finished, because New Harmony and its sister cities represented more than just impressive engineering. They represented a complete reimagining of how civilizations could exist in space. And as she spoke, the holographic display shifted to show the interior of the megacity, revealing gardens that would make paradise worlds weep with envy, residential areas where families lived in homes with real sunlight and real weather patterns, controlled by sophisticated atmospheric processors, schools where children played in parks that seemed to stretch to horizons that shouldn't exist in an enclosed space, all of it functioning as a self-contained ecosystem that could survive anything the universe threw at it. And the message was clear: humanity might be young, but they had already mastered arts that even the ancient civilizations still struggled with. The silence that fell across the Galactic Assembly Hall was profound and uncomfortable, broken only by the soft humming of translation matrices working to process the emotional undertones that crossed species barriers. And Ambassador Chen stood at the center of that silence, no longer the supplicant seeking approval, but a representative of a species that had just demonstrated they were not merely ready to join the galactic community, they were ready to reshape it. And she could see the calculations happening behind dozens of different types of eyes, the political ramifications, the economic implications, the fundamental shift in power dynamics that came from the realization that humanity was not weak at all, just patient. The Valdrene High Chancellor's crystalline form cycled through colors Chen had never seen before, his internal harmonics creating sounds that even the translation matrices struggled to interpret. And when he finally spoke, his voice had lost all of its earlier condescension, replaced with something that sounded almost like respect, though tempered with wariness. And he asked the question that everyone in the chamber was thinking. What did humanity want? What price would Earth demand for sharing this biotechnology? What concessions would they require in exchange for granting other civilizations access to the megacity construction? Techniques that could revolutionize space colonization across 12 galaxies. Chen let the question hang in the air for a moment, understanding that this was the pivotal instant, the point where humanity could demand almost anything and receive it, where Earth could leverage its technological advantage into immediate power, influence, and resources beyond measure. And she saw the expectation in the eyes of the assembled delegates, the assumption that humanity would do exactly what any young, ambitious species would do, that they would press their advantage, extract every possible benefit, secure their position through whatever means necessary, because that was what the strong did to the weak. That was how the game had always been played, and surely humanity understood that now. But Chen had not traveled across the stars to play by rules that had been written by civilizations who had forgotten what it meant to struggle. And when she spoke, her words were not demands but an offer. Humanity would share the biotechnology freely, without restriction or cost, making the complete technical specifications available to any civilization that wanted them. Because Earth had not developed New Harmony to hoard power but to prove a point, that collaboration was stronger than competition, that shared prosperity elevated everyone, that the future of galactic civilization did not have to be a zero-sum game, where one species' advancement came at another's expense. The chamber erupted in chaos, delegates rising from their seats, voices overlapping in dozens of languages as shock gave way to disbelief, and disbelief gave way to suspicion, because surely there had to be a catch. Surely humanity wanted something in return. No species gave away such valuable technology for free. It violated every economic principle that governed interstellar trade, and the Korthax warrior scholar Thexcal actually laughed. A harsh chittering sound that translated as bitter amusement, declaring that humanity's naivety would be their downfall, that giving away their greatest advantage was the act of fools, not visionaries, and that within a century, other civilizations would use the very technology Earth had shared to surpass humanity and render them irrelevant. Chen waited for the noise to subside, her calm demeanor never wavering, and when silence finally returned, she explained what her species had learned through centuries of struggle and survival, that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology, or their weapons, or their individual capabilities. It had always been their ability to bring others together, to find common ground where none seemed to exist, to build communities that were stronger than any individual could be alone, and that was the real test the Assembly had been conducting. Whether humanity would react to rejection with anger or wisdom, whether Earth would meet contempt with revenge or grace, whether humans understood that true civilization was measured not by what you could take, but by what you were willing to give. The orbital megacities, Chen revealed, were never meant to be fortresses or symbols of dominance. They were intended as gifts, as demonstrations of what was possible when a species focused on solving problems rather than winning competitions, and when other civilizations began building their own versions using humanity's shared designs. When the biotechnology that powered New Harmony began spreading across the galaxies, creating habitats and worlds where none could exist before, humanity would be satisfied with one simple acknowledgement, that Earth had earned its place among the stars not through strength or intimidation, but through the contribution they made to everyone's future, and that was worth more than any amount of political power or economic advantage. The Valdrine High Chancellor's form shifted to a deep, resonant blue. A color Chen's briefing files indicated meant profound respect among his people, and he spoke with a gravity that silenced every remaining murmur in the chamber, acknowledging that the Assembly had made a grave error in judgment, that they had looked at humanity's short history and small territory and assumed weakness, when in fact they should have looked at Earth's resilience, at how humanity had survived ice ages and pandemics and countless self-inflicted catastrophes, at how humans had gone from wooden sailing ships to orbital megacities in less than 500 years, at how a species that had seemed on the verge of destroying itself had instead chosen to reach for the stars with open hands and generous hearts. The vote that followed was unanimous. Earth would not merely be granted membership in the Galactic Assembly. They would be invited to join the Foundational Council, the group of elder civilizations who shaped policy and guided the development of younger species. And as Chen watched the results display across the holographic interfaces, she felt tears streaming down her face, not tears of triumph, but of relief, because humanity had passed a test they hadn't even known they were taking, proving that strength without wisdom was just brutality, that power without purpose was just tyranny, and that a civilization's worth was measured not by what they built, but by what they chose to share. And high above the assembly world, 7 orbital megacities adjusted their orbits in perfect synchronization, their living surfaces gleaming like pearls against the darkness of space, monuments to human ingenuity and human generosity, ready to become the seeds of a new era where weakness was no longer measured by what you lacked, but by what you refused to give, and where the question was not whether humanity deserved to walk among the stars, but whether the stars deserved to have humanity walking among them.